The signal was weak. It came from the empty space between two spiral arms of the galaxy, where ships rarely traveled and help never came quickly. It was a distress call. It carried the sound of pure terror. Commander Yara Chen was asleep when the alarm pulled her from her dreams. She had been dreaming of Earth, of the small apartment in Singapore where she grew up, of the sound of rain on windows. But the alarm cut through everything, and within seconds she was on her feet. Pulling on her uniform and moving toward the bridge, the United Earth naval ship Perseverance was not a large vessel. It was a frigate, built for patrol duty and light combat. For 11 months, Chen and her crew of 200 had been running patrol routes along the edge of contested space. They were tired. Their supplies were running low. They had not seen real action in over a year. Lieutenant Vasquez met her at the bridge door. His face was pale in the blue light of the corridor. "Commander, we picked up something on the long-range sensors. You need to hear this." Chen stepped onto the bridge. The night shift crew was already at their stations, and all of them turned to look at her. She could see the tension in their faces. "Play it," she said. The communications officer touched a control, and a voice filled the bridge. It was not a human voice. The translation software converted it into English, but something was lost in the process. The fear, however, came through perfectly clear. "This is the Valenthie Sea Dark. We are under attack. Our engines are destroyed. They are cutting through our hull. Please, if anyone can hear this, we have 40,000 souls on board. We have children. Please. Anyone, please help us." The message repeated. Each time, the voice grew more desperate. Chen stood very still. She knew about the Valenthie. Every officer in the fleet had studied the basic files on galactic species. The Valenthie were a peaceful race. They had lost their home world to a dying star 3 generations ago. And now they lived on great ships that traveled slowly through space, looking for a new home. They had no weapons. They believed that violence was wrong. They were, by any measure, completely defenseless. "Where is this coming from?" Chen asked. "Sector 773, the navigation officer replied. "About 12 hours away, if we push the engines hard." "And who is attacking them?" There was a pause. Then Vasquez said the words that made everything more complicated. "Kethver Dominion. Our sensors picked up at least 6 cruisers in the area." The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what the Kethver were. They were slavers. For 3,000 years, they had raided the weaker species of the galaxy, taking prisoners and selling them in markets that the Galactic Council pretended did not exist. They were brutal, efficient, and they had never been stopped. 6 cruisers. The Perseverance was 1 frigate. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Obi leaned back in his chair. He was a large man with dark skin and calm eyes, and he had been in the Navy for 20 years. He had seen combat. He had lost friends. And right now, he was doing the math in his head. "Commander," he said slowly, "we cannot win a straight fight against 6 cruisers. We would be destroyed in minutes." "I know," Chen said. "The Galactic Council has protocols for this. They will send a response fleet. It might take a few days, but they will send help." "I know," Chen said again. She walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the main view screen. It showed the stars ahead, cold and distant and beautiful. Somewhere out there, 40,000 people were dying. 40,000 people who had done nothing wrong except exist in a galaxy that did not protect the weak. "How long until the Kethver finished their boarding operation?" she asked. The tactical officer checked his data. "Based on standard Dominion procedures, they will have secured the ship within 6 hours. After that, they will begin moving prisoners to their cruisers. The whole process takes about 10 hours. And the Council response fleet? For days minimum. That is the standard response time for a distress call in contested space." Chen closed her eyes. For days, the Valenthie would be gone in 10 hours. Their children would be in chains, being transported to slave markets on the other side of the galaxy. And by the time the Council fleet arrived, there would be nothing left but an empty ship and a lot of diplomatic apologies. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the stories the old woman used to tell, about the wars on Earth, about the times when ordinary people had to make extraordinary choices. Her grandmother had always said the same thing: when you see someone in trouble, you help them. That is what makes us human. Chen opened her eyes. "Helm," she said, "plot an intercept course for Sector 773. Maximum speed." The helmsman hesitated. "Commander, are you sure? The odds are not in our favor." "I am aware of the odds." She turned to face her crew. They were looking at her with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that looked like hope. "Listen to me," she said. "I am not going to order anyone to do this. What I am about to do goes against every regulation in the book. The smart thing to do is to wait for the Council fleet and let someone else handle this problem. That is the safe choice. That is the logical choice." She paused. "But there are children on that ship. There are families who have already lost everything once. And right now, we are the only ones who can reach them in time." She looked at each of them in turn. The helmsman, the tactical officer, the communications specialist, the gunnery sergeant, every single person on her bridge. "We are humans," she said. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended us. We did not survive all of that just to sit here and let innocent people die because we were afraid." She straightened her spine. "I am going. Anyone who wants to stay behind can take an escape pod and wait for pickup. I will not think less of you. But I am going." Nobody moved. Sergeant Obi stood up from his chair. He was smiling, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "Commander," he said, "I did not join the Navy to run away from fights. If we are doing this, then let us do it properly." One by one, the rest of the crew nodded. Some of them were scared. Chen could see it in their faces. But they were also something else. They were proud. The helmsman turned back to his console and began entering the coordinates. "Course plotted, Commander. We will arrive in 11 hours and 47 minutes. All hands to stations," Chen said. "We are going to war." The Perseverance turned toward the distant stars and accelerated into faster-than-light travel. The ship shook as it pushed past the limits of normal space. And then everything went quiet. In the silence, Chen allowed herself one moment of doubt. One moment to wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. One moment to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Then she pushed the doubt, sighed, and focused on the mission. Somewhere in the void, 40,000 people were waiting for help. And the Perseverance was coming. The Kethvar did not know it yet. But they were about to learn something important about humans. They were about to learn that when a distress signal echoed through the darkness, Deathworlders answered. And Deathworlders did not give up. Ever War Master. Thalvex stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the Volanthe ship burn. The Crushing Tide was the largest vessel in his hunting fleet. It had 16 heavy weapons, 3,000 warriors, and a reputation that made other species surrender without a fight. Thalvex had commanded it for 40 years, and in that time, he had never lost a battle. The Volanthe had been easy prey. Their ship was beautiful, shaped like a flower opening to the stars, but it had no weapons and no shields worth mentioning. His cruisers had disabled it in less than an hour. Now his boarding parties were cutting through the hull, and soon the prisoners would begin flowing into his cargo bays. 40,000 Velanthai. At current market prices, that was enough wealth to buy a small moon. Thalvex clicked his mandibles together in satisfaction. Life was good. His tactical officer interrupted his pleasant thoughts. "War Master, we have a contact dropping out of superluminal travel. Single vessel." Thalvex turned his large head toward the sensor display. "Council response already? They are faster than usual." "Get of War Master. The vessel configuration does not match any council registry." The officer paused, and Thalvex noticed something strange in his voice. Was that fear? "The ship is Terran." The bridge went silent. Thalvex had been a warrior for 60 years. He had fought dozens of species across hundreds of systems. He had learned to read the body language of creatures that did not even have bodies in the traditional sense. And right now, he could see that his entire bridge crew was afraid. Terrans, humans, Deathworlders, every species in the galaxy knew the stories. The humans came from a planet that was actively trying to kill them. Their world had crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, and an atmosphere filled with a corrosive gas that most species could not breathe. The planet was covered with predators, parasites, and diseases that had forced the humans to evolve into something terrifying. They were persistence hunters. They chased their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could survive injuries that would kill most species 3 times over. They consumed poisons for pleasure and broke their own bones for entertainment. Their history was an endless record of wars, each one more destructive than the last, and they had a reputation for something else. Something that made even the HFY Dominion nervous. Humans protected the weak. It was not logical. It did not make sense from an evolutionary standpoint. But humans had a tendency to throw themselves into fights that were not their concern, to risk their lives for strangers, to refuse to abandon anyone who asked for help. The Dominion had a standing order regarding humans. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not hunt them under any circumstances. But this was different. This was 1 ship against 6. Open a channel, Thalvex ordered. Let us see what they want. The view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. It was a female, small and soft-looking, compared to HFY standards. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and she sat in a command chair that seemed too large for her. She did not look afraid. That was the first thing Thalvex noticed. She looked at him the same way he looked at prey animals. With calm assessment and no emotion, HFY vessels, she said, "This is Commander Yara Chen of the United Earth Navy. You will stop your boarding operation immediately. You will release the Volanthi survivors. You will leave this sector." This is not a request. Thalvex leaned forward on his command throne. "Human, you are 1 ship. I have 6. Your reputation does not make you invincible. Leave now, and I will forget this insult." The human did not react to his threat. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if she was studying him. "War Master, I am going to explain something to you. On my world, we have an animal called a honey badger. It is small. It weighs less than 1 of your fingers. But it attacks lions. It fights snakes. It digs into beehives and eats the inhabitants. It does this not because it is stupid, but because it simply does not care about the odds." She smiled, and Thalvex felt something cold move through his secondary heart. "My species is like the honey badger. We do not calculate risks the way you do. We see someone in trouble, and we help them. It does not matter if we are outgunned. It does not matter if we might die. We do it anyway, because that is who we are." Thalvex tried to maintain his composure. "Pretty words, but words do not win battles." "No," Chen agreed. "Actions do. And in about 45 minutes, my boarding teams are going to be on your flagship. You can spend that time preparing to evacuate, or you can spend it learning why the galaxy calls us Deathworlders." The channel closed. Thalvex sat in silence for a long moment. His bridge crew was watching him, waiting for orders. He could feel their fear, and it was beginning to infect him. No, he was War Master of the Dominion. He had crushed species that thought they were strong. 1 small human ship was nothing. "All cruisers," he said, "target the Terran vessel. Destroy it." His fleet opened fire. The first volley should have ended the fight. 6 cruisers, firing together, could generate enough firepower to crack a small moon. The human ship was directly in their sights, motionless and vulnerable. But the ship was not there when the weapons hit. It moved. Not in a straight line, but in a complex pattern that seemed to anticipate exactly where the weapons would strike. It ducked and twisted and spun, and somehow, impossibly, it was not hit. "What is happening?" Thalvex demanded. "Why are we missing?" "The human vessel is using the asteroid field as cover," his tactical officer reported, "and they are deploying some kind of electronic interference. Our targeting systems cannot lock on." Thalvex watched the view screen with growing horror. The human ship was dancing through the asteroids like it belonged there, and his cruisers were struggling to keep up. 2 of his ships collided, trying to pursue, their hulls grinding together in a spray of metal and fire. pull back, reform the line. But it was too late. The human ship had already disappeared into the debris field. Now it was hunting his fleet from the shadows. Thalvex realized something then. Something that changed everything he thought he knew about humans. They were not just survivors from a death world. They were not just persistent hunters who never gave up. They were predators. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Kethver Dominion was the prey. His communications officer spoke up, voice trembling. War Master, we are detecting multiple small contacts leaving the human vessel. They appear to be individual beings. In vacuum suits, Thalvex stared at the sensor data. The humans were sending warriors through open space. No ship, no protection. Just bodies in suits flying through the void toward his flagship. It was insane. No species could survive extended exposure to vacuum. The temperature extremes alone would kill most creatures within minutes. But humans were not most creatures. Seal all airlocks, Thalvex ordered. Prepare for boarding action. His warriors scrambled to obey, but Thalvex could see the doubt in their movements. They had never been boarded before. They had always been the ones doing the boarding. Somewhere on the outer hull, he heard a sound. Metal cutting through metal. The humans had arrived, and they had brought the fury of a death world with them. Sergeant Marcus Obi had been in space for almost 2 hours, and his suit was starting to fail. The temperature inside had dropped to nearly freezing. His oxygen supply was running low. His muscles were cramping from the effort of controlling his movement through the void. Any other species would have died long ago, but Marcus Obi was human. And humans did not die easily. He could see the crushing tide ahead of him, a massive shape blocking out the stars. His team of 12 was spread out behind him, each one carrying cutting tools and weapons. They had trained for this kind of operation many times, but they had never actually done it in combat. There was a first time for everything. Team, this is Obi. Final approach. Remember your training. We go in fast, we go in quiet, and we do not stop until we reach the bridge. His radio crackled with responses. Everyone was ready. Obi fired his thrusters and aimed for a maintenance airlock on the lower hull. The Kethver had sealed their main entrances, but they had not thought about the small hatches used by repair drones. Humans were small by galactic standards. They could fit through spaces that most species could not even imagine. The cutting tool made quick work of the hatch. Within minutes, Obi was inside the ship, floating in a narrow corridor lit by emergency lights. The artificial gravity had been turned off in this section, probably to make movement harder for intruders. The Kethver did not realize that humans had spent decades training for zero-gravity combat. His team followed him in. One by one, their weapons ready. Gravity boots on, Obi ordered. Stay close. Check your corners. They moved through the ship like ghosts. The first Kethver warrior they encountered was standing guard at an intersection. He was big, easily 7 feet tall, with a hard shell covering most of his body and claws that could tear through metal. He turned when he heard them coming, and his eyes went wide with surprise. Obi did not give him time to react. He closed the distance in 3 quick steps, ducked under the warrior's swing, and struck the back of his knee with his combat baton. The Kethver fell forward, off balance, and Obi used his momentum to roll behind him. One arm went around the warrior's neck, applying pressure to the breathing holes on the side of his throat. The Kethver struggled, but Obi held on. Within seconds, the warrior went limp. Clear, Obi said softly. Move. His team continued forward. The Kethver were not prepared for this kind of fighting. They were used to ranged combat, to shooting at enemies from a distance. They had never faced a species that preferred to fight up close, that used every part of their body as a weapon, that moved through spaces like water flowing around rocks. Human martial arts had been developed over thousands of years on a planet full of dangerous creatures. Every style, every technique was designed to allow a smaller, weaker being to defeat a larger, stronger opponent. The Kethver were bigger and stronger than humans, but that did not matter. What mattered was speed, precision, and the willingness to keep fighting no matter what. Obi's team cut through the ship like a blade through cloth. They moved from corridor to corridor, taking down guards, disabling security systems, and leaving a trail of unconscious bodies behind them. The HFY warriors fought hard, but they were always a step behind at the same time. The Perseverance was tearing the HFY fleet apart. Commander Chen stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display with fierce concentration. Her ship was faster and more maneuverable than the HFY cruisers, and she used that advantage mercilessly. Helm, bring us around behind the third cruiser. Gunnery, target their engine array. The Perseverance swept through the debris field, dodging asteroids and enemy fire with equal grace. Lieutenant Park at the helm was performing calculations in his head that would have taken most computers several seconds. Adjusting their course with tiny movements of his hands. Firing solution locked, the gunnery officer reported. Fire. A burst of energy struck the cruiser's engines, and the ship went dark. It was not destroyed, but it was no longer a threat. Chen nodded. Next target. Keep moving. The HFY had never fought like this before. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with numbers and firepower, to crushing opposition through sheer force. But the humans did not fight that way. They struck and retreated, hit and ran, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. It was the fighting style of predators, of wolves hunting prey that was larger than themselves. 2 more cruisers were disabled. A 4th was limping away, its hull venting atmosphere. The remaining ships were trying to regroup, but their coordination was falling apart. Their commanders were confused, scared, and making mistakes. On the crushing tide, War Master Thalvex was getting desperate. Where are the intruders? He demanded. Why have we not stopped them? His security chief had no good answers. They are moving too fast, War Master. Our warriors cannot track them. Every time we think we have them cornered, they disappear. Thalvex slammed his fist against his command throne. This was impossible. 12 humans against 3,000 warriors. And they were losing? The bridge doors exploded inward. Obi came through first, rolling to avoid the debris and coming up with his weapon raised. Behind him, his team fanned out, each one covering a section of the bridge. The HFY officers froze. They had sidearms, but the humans were faster, their weapons already aimed at vital targets. Thalvex stared at the small human who was pointing a gun at his primary nerve cluster. The human was breathing hard, and there was blood on his suit, but his hand was perfectly steady. Your fleet is disabled, Obi said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Your boarding parties have been pushed back from the Valanthe ship. The survivors are armed now. They are fighting back. Thalvex felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt fear. How? He managed. The Valanthe have no weapons. He gave them some. Turns out that when you give a peaceful species guns and tell them their children are in danger, they become very motivated.
Always.
Smiled slightly. We also taught them some basic tactics. Humans are good teachers. On the view screen, Thalvex could see the Velamade ship. There were flashes of light around the hull breaches, where his warriors had tried to board. But the warriors were not advancing. They were retreating. The Valanthe were driving them back. Commander Chen sends her regards, Obi continued. Also wanted me to remind you that our original offer still stands. Withdraw your forces, leave this sector, and we will let you go. Otherwise, he shrugged, we can do this the hard way. Thalvex looked around his bridge. His officers were terrified. His fleet was broken. His warriors were being defeated by a species that was supposed to be helpless. He had been a war master for 40 years. He had never surrendered to anyone, but he had also never faced humans before. Stand down, he said quietly. All forces, stand down. The order went out across what remained of his fleet. One by one, the HFY ships stopped firing. The warriors pulled back from the Valanthe vessel. The battle was over. Obi lowered his weapon slightly. Good choice. Thalvex leaned back in his throne, exhausted and defeated. What are you? He asked.
Yeah.
The council calls you Deathworlders, but that does not explain. This, 1 ship against 6, 12 warriors against 3,000? How is this possible? Obi thought about the question for a moment. Then he gave the only answer that mattered. We are from Earth, he said. "And we do not leave people behind." Outside the viewport, the stars shone cold and distant. But somewhere among them, the Perseverance was already moving toward the Valanthe ship, ready to begin the next phase of the mission. The fighting was over. Now came the hard part, saving lives. The Valanthe Sea Dark was dying. Commander Chen could see it through the viewport of the Perseverance. The great ship was shaped like a flower, with curved petals spreading out from a central core, and once it must have been beautiful. But now it was broken. Holes had been torn through the hull. Entire sections were dark and lifeless. Atmosphere was leaking into space like blood from a wound. 40,000 people were on that ship. 40,000 survivors of a species that had already lost everything once. Chen would not let them lose again. "Helm, bring us alongside. We're going to dock directly." Lieutenant Park looked at her with concern. "Commander, the ship is tumbling. If we try to dock while it is moving like that, we could damage both vessels. Then match its rotation. I know you can do it." Park took a deep breath. Then he turned back to his controls and began the most difficult maneuver of his career. The Perseverance moved closer to the Valanthe ship, adjusting its speed and angle with tiny bursts from its thrusters. The tumbling motion of the Ark looked chaotic, but Park found the pattern hidden within it. He matched the rotation perfectly, bringing the two ships together as gently as a kiss. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk. "We are connected," Park announced, and there was relief in his voice. Chen was already moving toward the airlock. "All medical personnel, follow me. Engineering teams, grab every repair kit we have. We have work to do." The interior of the Valanthe ship was worse than she had expected. The corridors were filled with debris and the sounds of crying. The lights flickered constantly, and the air smelled wrong, thin and stale. Emergency barriers had been set up to seal the breached sections, but they were failing. And Chen could hear the hiss of escaping atmosphere behind them. Valanthe survivors lined the halls. They were tall and thin, with pale skin that glowed faintly with bioluminescent light. Most of them were huddled together in small groups, their glow dim with fear and exhaustion. They looked at the humans with wide eyes, not sure whether to be relieved or frightened. Chen stopped in front of an elderly Valanthe who seemed to be coordinating the survivors. "I am Commander Chen of the United Earth Navy. We are here to help. Tell me what you need." The Valanthe elder stared at her for a long moment. Then tears began to flow down his face, shining like liquid light. "You came," he whispered. "You actually came. Of course we came. Now tell me what you need." The list was long. Life support was failing in 3 sectors. Medical supplies were exhausted. Dozens of wounded needed treatment. Engines were completely destroyed, and without them, the ship would eventually drift into an asteroid field. Chen organized her people with the efficiency that came from years of crisis management. Engineering teams spread throughout the ship, patching holes with emergency foam and rerouting power from dead systems to living ones. Medical teams set up triage stations in the cargo bays, turning empty spaces into hospitals. Dr. Amara Eulerin took charge of the medical effort. She was a small woman with steady hands and a mind that could process information faster than most computers. Within minutes of arriving, she had assessed the situation and begun making decisions. Valanthe physiology was delicate. Their bones were hollow, their skin was thin, and their circulatory systems could not handle trauma the way human bodies could. Most doctors would have been overwhelmed, but human medicine had been developed on a death world. Humans had spent their entire history learning how to save lives in impossible conditions. In war zones and disaster areas and environments that were actively trying to kill them, Dr. Eulerin adapted. She modified drug dosages based on body mass calculations performed in her head. She improvised surgical techniques that had never been tried on Valanthe patients. She recruited Valanthe volunteers to assist, teaching them basic procedures through gestures when words failed. In the first hour, she saved 37 lives. By the 6th hour, the number had grown to over 200, but not all the help being given was medical. In the ship's central nursery, Petty Officer Diana Reyes found herself surrounded by children. The Valanthe young were tiny, barely reaching. Her knee, with huge eyes and skin that flickered with unstable light. They had been separated from their parents during the attack, and they were terrified. They huddled in corners, crying in voices that sounded like wind chimes breaking. Reyes was a communications specialist. She had no training in childcare, no experience with alien species, and no idea what she was supposed to do. But she looked at those children, and something deep inside her refused to walk away. She sat down on the floor, making herself as small as possible. The children watched her with suspicion. She said softly, "It is okay. You are safe now." They did not understand her words. Of course they did not. They were children who spoke a different language, so Reyes did the only thing she could think of. She started to sing. It was an old song, something her grandmother had taught her when she was young. A lullaby about mockingbirds and diamond rings, about a mother's love that would never fail. The words did not matter. What mattered was the sound, the rhythm, the promise of safety in every note. The children stopped crying. Slowly, one by one, they moved closer. Their skin began to shift color from the white of fear to something softer, bluer. One small child climbed into her lap, and another, then a dozen more, surrounding her in a sea of tiny bodies in fading light. Reyes kept singing an hour later. Avelant the elder found her in the nursery. Reyes was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by sleeping children. Her voice hoarse from singing the same songs over and over. Tears were streaming down her face. "Why do you weep?" the elder asked. Reyes looked at the children, at the damaged walls around them, at everything that had almost been lost. "Because we almost did not make it in time," she said. "Because we almost were not here." The elder sat down beside her. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the sleeping children with ancient eyes. "The Galactic Council calls your species Deathworlders," he said finally. "They say you are dangerous, that you come from a world of violence and pain, that you should be feared." Reyes said nothing. "But I think they do not understand." The elder reached out and gently touched one of the sleeping children. "A death world does not only create killers. It creates protectors. It creates beings who know how precious life is, because they have fought for it every single day." He looked at Reyes, and his skin glowed warm with gratitude. "You did not come here because you wanted something from us. You did not come for payment, or territory, or power. You came because someone was in trouble, and that was enough." Reyes wiped her eyes. "That is just what humans do," yes, the elder said. "And that is why the galaxy will remember you, not as monsters, not as Deathworlders, but as the ones who answered when no one else would." In the corridor outside, human engineers and Velanadi survivors worked side by side, repairing systems and saving lives. In the medical bay, Dr. Eulerin continued her work, each patient a small victory against the darkness. And on the bridge of the Perseverance, Commander Chen watched the repair efforts with tired satisfaction. They had won the battle. But this was the victory that truly mattered. Not the defeat of enemies, but the saving of lives. This was what humanity had been born to do. The Galactic Council fleet arrived 3 days late. 15 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their hulls gleaming with the polished elegance of vessels that had never seen real combat. They formed a perfect formation, weapons ready, shields raised, prepared to face a crisis that had already ended. Ambassador Kethri stood on the bridge of the lead ship and stared at the scene before her with growing confusion. The Velanthe, Sea Dark, was still damaged, but it was no longer dying. Emergency repairs had stabilized the hull. Power was flowing to essential systems. And attached to the great ship like a smaller sibling was a single human frigate, its crew still working to help the survivors. The Kethver fleet was gone. 2 of their cruisers had been towed away by their remaining vessels. The others had fled into deep space, defeated and humiliated. A single human ship had done this. 1 frigate against 6 cruisers, and the humans had one. Kethray ordered her shuttle to dock with the human vessel. She needed to understand what had happened here. Commander Chen met her at the airlock. The human commander looked exhausted. Her uniform was stained with oil and what might have been blood. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. But she stood straight, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "Ambassador, you are late." Kethray felt her diplomatic training slip for a moment. Commander Chen, you violated 17 Council protocols by engaging Dominion forces without authorization. You risked an interstellar incident. You could have started a war. Chen's expression did not change. Ambassador, when we arrived, the HFY were cutting through the hull of a civilian vessel. They were preparing to take 40,000 people into slavery, including children. The Council response time was 4 days. How many of those people would have survived your protocols? HFY had no answer. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was still the truth. The Council had failed. Their systems, their procedures, their careful diplomacy had all been designed to prevent conflict, not to save lives. And when a real crisis had emerged, they had been too slow to help. The humans had not been too slow. I will need to file a report, HFY said finally. There will be inquiries. Questions about your methods. File whatever you want, Chen replied. My crew and I have work to finish. She turned and walked back into her ship, leaving the ambassador standing alone at the airlock. The following weeks saw changes that no one had anticipated. The HFY Dominion, one of the most feared powers in the galaxy, began to collapse. The story of what had happened spread across 1,000 worlds, carried by traders and refugees and diplomatic channels. A single human frigate had defeated 6 cruisers. A dozen human warriors had boarded a flagship and captured its commander. The Dominion, which had spent 3,000 years preying on the weak, had finally met something that refused to be prey. Species that had been enslaved for generations heard the story and began to believe something dangerous, that they could fight back. Rebellions sparked across Dominion space, each one inspired by the image of humans standing against impossible odds. Within a year, the Dominion would be a memory. The Valenthi made a request that shocked the Council. The High Speaker of their people traveled to Earth personally, crossing the galaxy to stand before the human government. He brought gifts and formal documents and centuries of tradition behind him. "You've saved our children," he said to the assembled leaders. "In our culture, there is no greater debt. We are asking to join you, not as subjects or servants, but as family." It was the first time any species had requested full integration with humanity. It would not be the last, but perhaps the most significant change was the distress signal itself. Copies of it spread across the galaxy. The original message, the desperate plea for help, was paired with recordings of everything that followed: the battle, the rescue, the testimonies of survivors who described humans working through the night to save lives, singing lullabies to frighten children, refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. The message became more than a distress call. It became a symbol. Other species began to reach out to Earth, not with pleas for help, but with something simpler: introductions. They wanted to know more about these strange beings from the Deathworld. They wanted to understand why humans were different. The signals came from everywhere. From mining colonies and research stations, from refugee ships and isolated outposts, from species that had hidden in the shadows for fear of predators like the HFY. They'd all heard the same story. They all had the same question: would the humans help them too? Commander Yara Chen never thought of herself as anything special. She was a naval officer. She had done her job. The fact that her job had changed the galaxy was something she tried not to think. It's about too much. But on the last day before the Valanthi Sea Dark left for its new home, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She stood on the observation deck of the Perseverance, watching the Valanthi ship prepare for departure. It was still damaged, still scarred from the attack, but it was alive. 40,000 survivors who would live to see another day, another year, another generation. Lieutenant Vasquez appeared at her shoulder. "Commander, we are getting another signal. Unregistered frequency, coming from somewhere in the outer territories." He paused. "It sounds like a colony ship. They are asking if anyone can hear them." Chen closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about everything that had happened: the battle, the rescue, the children who had slept in the arms of a human officer, who could not understand their language, but understood their fear. She thought about what it meant to be human. Not the fighting, though that was part of it. Not the surviving, though that was too. It was something deeper than that. Something that had been carved into her species since the first human. Stood up on the African plains and looked at the dangerous world around them. It was the choice to help. The universe was vast and cold and indifferent. There was no cosmic law that required anyone to care about strangers. Evolution did not reward selflessness. Logic did not demand sacrifice, but humans did it anyway. They helped because it was right. They protected the weak because someone had to. They threw themselves into danger for strangers because that was what separated them from the monsters. The galaxy had called them Deathworlders. They had meant it as a warning, but Chen knew the truth. The galaxy did not need to fear humans. The galaxy needed to understand that the Deathworlders were on their side. She opened her eyes and looked at Vasquez. "Plot a course," she said. The lieutenant smiled. "Already done, Commander." Perseverance turned toward the distant stars, its engines flaring with light. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was calling for help, and once again, humanity answered. Far behind them, the Volante Sea Dark began its long journey toward a new home. Its people stood at the viewports and watched the human ship disappear into the void. An elder knelt beside a group of children who were pressing their faces against the glass. "Remember this," he said softly. "Remember what they did for us. Remember that when we were lost and afraid, the humans came." A young child looked up at him with glowing eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why did they help us?" The elder smiled, because that is what humans do, across the galaxy. In the depths of space, where light never reached, a new distress signal began to echo through the stars. It would not echo for long. The Deathworlders were already on their way.